All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin. My apologies for the slight delay. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's daf. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah Ben Zechariah and Dinah Bas Rabdov. We thank Art and Shari Miller for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in loving memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven Ben Betzalel V'Rachel. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Ayal Steinberg for the refuah sheleimah of Shulamis Bas Susha. And we thank our Daf Yomi sponsors today, Moshe Ann Ellen Gavant, in commemoration of the 26th yahrzeit of Ann Ellen's father, Blockman, Ben Moshe Dovid. Zichron Levrach. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, and Shama have an aliyah and the family in nechama. With that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, but don't worry, a lot to do today, not as much to do tomorrow, so we could take our time. Whatever we get through today, we get through. Emir Hashem, and tomorrow we will conclude the Masechta B'Sha'a Tova U'Mitzlacha. So we'll say, so today's daf is Chav Ches 28, and we are picking up at Chav Zayin Amud Beis. We actually left off pretty high up on Amud Beis. In the wide lines of the daf, we are 2, 4, 5 lines down. In Manichen es Hamita Berachot. Remember again, Mishnah said that if you have a levaya on Chalamayid, so you don't go ahead and leave the funeral bier in the street, as leaving it in the street will encourage people to say hespedim. Thank you so much. Will encourage people to say hespedim. Will encourage people to eulogize. Thank you again. And eulogies, of course, are prohibited on Chalamayid. Says the Gemara. Amar Papa. In Moed b'fnei Talmud Chacham, b'chol shekein Chanukah Purim. So our Papa said, we'll say, while it is true that you're not allowed to go ahead and eulogize on Chalamayid, that doesn't apply to a Talmud Chacham. When it comes to a Talmud Chacham, the loss of a Talmud Chacham, eulogies are permitted, even on Chalamayid, and all the more so on Chanukah and Purim. But that's only true when literally the mace, the Talmud Chacham, is in your presence. In other words, that the body is there. But Allah Chalamayisa, even with the death of a Talmud Chacham, one can't eulogize a Talmud Chacham on Chalamayid or on Chalamayid or on Chanukah and Purim if the mace is not present. Ini, is that so? Varav Kahana Sapte Rav Zvid min Arda Bipum Nara. But yet one time it happened that Rav Zvid passed away, and Rav Kahana eulogized him in Pub Nara, which was not in the presence of Rav Zvid. Yom Shmua Haba Ukipanav Dami. There's a difference. In other words, we'll say Yom Shmua means it was the day that Rav Zvid actually passed away. And the day in which a Talmud Chacham actually passes away, the pain is so acute, that has the status as if again, the body of the Talmud Chacham was literally present. So we'll say, it turns out that the Gemara seems to be saying two things. That although normally we do not eulogize on Chalamayid, Chanukah, Purim, that only the exception to that rule is a Talmud Chacham. Talmud Chacham you can eulogize on those days. However, again, even a Talmud Chacham, eulogies are only permitted if the Talmud Chacham, the body, is present. The exception to that rule is the actual day of death. If the Talmud Chacham actually passes away on Chalamayid, on Yom Tiv, on Chanukah, Purim, then halacha l'maisa again, Yom Shemua has the same status as if the Talmud Chacham is actually present, and hespedim eulogies would be permitted. So Amar Ula says hesped al leiv. So this is interesting. Often we go ahead and translate the word hesped as eulogy, but the Gemara says over here al leiv metapech keneged halev. Hesped means to go ahead and literally bang against or clap against one's heart. Tichsiv al shadaim soptim tipuach biyad. Tipuach means, right, mitapeach means to clap one hand, to clap, not clapping in joy, but rather again clapping one's hands together, ultimately again out of pain. Kilos beregel. Kilos is the act of stomping one's foot, ultimately also as an expression of sadness and expression of pain. Tanra Abanon hamekalis lo yekalis besandal ela b'minal. So the Gemara says when a person stamps his foot as a form of mourning, he should not do so wearing a sandal, rather only a shoe, mipnei sakana, because of the danger. What danger is the Gemara referring to over here? Very similar danger of breaking one's foot. Right, that again, people mourn in different ways. They would hit their hand against their chest, they would clap their hands together, they would stamp their foot. So the Gemara just says, stamping has a danger of breaking your foot or injuring your foot, therefore do so in a shoe, not a sandal. Incredible. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Avel, Kevan Shineineh Rosho Shuv Eino Menachem Im Rishon Leishiv Eitzav. This is an incredible halacha. On Avel, once he nods his head, those who are assembled should leave. Right? That's ultimately, literally translated, it means once he nods his head, halacha l'maisa, no one should try to console him anymore. So we'll see, if you look at Rashi is Ninei Rosho, Shiner Shenichim Me'atzmo. So we'll say, essentially, when the Avel indicates, nods his head, that's a good indication that he's good, right? Now, Rashi's lashon is that he's been comforted. I think Pasha Pshat in the Gemara is what it means is what? Is that, he appreciates everyone for coming, but now it's time to leave. I will say it's always an interesting thing. Sometimes one of the most difficult things or awkward things in a shiva home is when people don't realize that it's time to go, right? And they just sit there because it's awkward, because you don't know what to say. In general, we'll say, remember again, the mitzvah of nichum avelim, we spoke about this earlier in the Masechta, is not to say something, right? It's not to share some pearl of wisdom, because often when a person experiences loss, they're just going to grieve, and nothing you're going to say is really going to make a difference one way or the other. Really what you provide is your company, right? And what you're saying is, I'm here. So really, once a person demonstrates that they're here, time to go. Don't sit around for those prolonged, awkward silences, and you're going to be the guy who then waits for someone else to get up so that you can go. Again, it's okay to go. It's okay to leave. You came, you did your thing, you didn't have to say anything. If the Avel doesn't speak to you, you don't have to speak. Your presence is enough. But again, from the Avelim perspective also, people think it's just awkward for the Menachamim, for the people who are coming to visit. It's awkward for the Avel also when people just kind of sit around and don't do anything. So therefore, again, the Mishnah says, once the Avel goes ahead and nods his head, the Menachamim Kli. Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Chayav Alam Dein Nasi, Chutz Mi Avel B'chola. So Rabbi Yochanan says, everyone is obligated to stand up for the Nasi. So Nasi, remember, is the head of the Jewish people. Nasi walks in the room, everyone's obligated to stand. Chutz Mi Avel B'chola, except for an Avel, and someone who is ill. So someone who is ill obviously is not obligated because they're a chola. An avel also is not bound, is not obligated by these behavioral displays of kavod. V'am Rabbi Yochanan, l'kol omrim lahem shavu, chutz mi avel chola. It's the same halacha. Everyone else, the same way you're obligated to stand for the nasi, you can't sit until the nasi gives you rishus to sit. With the exception, of course, of an avel and a chola, which makes sense since they're not obligated to stand from the beginning. Therefore, they're also not obligated to wait to be told to sit down before they sit. An avel on the first day of his avelus is not permitted to eat his own bread. Meaning his food must be supplied by the community. Since HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Yechezkel, remember again, this is the episode where Yechezkel lost his wife. So interestingly enough, what does Hashem say to Yechezkel? V'lechem anoshim lo sochal. Do not eat the bread of other people. So remember again, what's fascinating about this episode with Yechezkel is we learn out so much of Hilchos Avelus based on what? Based on what Yechezkel was told not to do. Hashem essentially tells Yechezkel not to mourn in the conventional way. So from what God tells Yechezkel not to do, we're able to glean many of the halachos concerning Avelus. So Hashem tells Yechezkel, don't accept food from other people. From here we see that an Avel is not supposed to eat his own food for the first day. I will say this is why today, and Nebra Halach is the Sudas Hadra, which is the meal of consolation, the meal that the Avelim eat when they come back from the Levaya. That meal is provided by the community. When I say community, it could be a shul, it could be one's friends. The point is, it's not their own food. It's not their own food. The Gesher HaChaim discusses why is that. right? Why is that? So it's very profound. Like Chaim says, he quotes a number of opinions, but one of the ideas that he quotes is the concept that we're concerned that the Avel is not going to take care of himself. Right? That sometimes a person is so consumed by grief that they don't even care about their own personal needs. And therefore, again, in an effort to ensure that the Avel has everything that he needs, ultimately we make sure that halacha l'maisa, his meals are provided for by the community. Again, this is just the Suda Rishona. This is not the obligation for the duration of Avelos, but ultimately, again, for the first meal. So the Gemara says, Rabba Rav Yosef michlefi Suda Sayol Hadadi. Rabba and Rav Yosef, they would prepare meals for one another when the other was in Avelos. Okay? V'amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Meis V'ir, Kol B'nei Ir Asur B'Asriyas Malacha. What's a very interesting halacha. So Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav, when a person dies in a city, all the residents of the city are prohibited from doing malacha in order to ensure that burial occurs. Right? So there's an isra malacha until the person is buried. Again, ensuring that people will go ahead and bury the dead. So the Gemara tells the story. Rav Hamnuna ikla l'durmasa. So Rav Huna went to Dromasa, to the south. Shama called Shipura de Shachba. There was apparently in this particular city, so they used to sound the shofar when someone passed away. So he heard the sound of the shofar indicating that the person had passed away. Chaza Hanach Inish the Ka'av the Avidita. He saw that there were people who were working. So here they blew the shofar, someone died, and he saw people working. Amar lahei, Amar lahu lehavi hanach inshi b'shamto. Lo shachva ika b'masa. So he said these people should be excommunicated. After all, isn't there a dead person in the city who needs to be buried? Amar lahei, they said to Rav Hamnuna, chaburasa ika b'masa. He said there's a chevra kadisha. Chaburasa means there are groups. So look at Rashi. Chaburasa ika, about 4 lines off from the end of Rashi. Chaburos heim she'elu kovrin mesim shalahem levadam ve'elu kovrin mesim shalahem levadam. Well, so listen to this. They had chavra kadishas. They had burial societies. So what's the pshat? What's the pshat of a burial society? You're a member of a particular society. Membership has its privileges. When you die, the society takes care of you. So therefore, again, what they were telling Rav Hamnuna was, everybody's a member of different societies. When a person passes away, their chevra kadisha takes care of them. So because their chevra kadisha takes care of them, it's not an obligation that devolves upon the entire city, just upon a particular chevra. So Rav Hamnuna says, okay, amar lahu ihachi shari lahu. If that's the case, I revoke the shanta. I revoke the excommunication, and you're good to go. Incredible. So the Gemara will say, here we have an incredible Gemara. We'll say, really incredible Gemara. Kala miskasha al meso yoser midai, al mes achar hu bocha. So we'll say, the Gemara says something absolutely amazing. A person who mourns excessively for their dead, ultimately, again, will end up mourning over subsequent relatives. Now there's 2 things being mentioned over here. There is what Gemara is telling us is a prohibition to mourn excessively. And then there's like a penalty. The penalty for mourning excessively is, unfortunately, having to mourn even more. So the Gemara tells a very dramatic story. There was a woman in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. Hava la shivas bani. She had 7 sons. Meis chad minayu. One of her children passed away. Hava kaboches biyiseras sa'alei. And the woman mourned excessively. Now, how you define excessive mourning, the Gemara is going to discuss a little bit, but this woman was mourning excessively. Shalach la Rav Huna. Rav Huna sent to her, Lo te'avdi hachi. Do not conduct yourself like this. Lo ashkecha be. She would not listen to him. Shalach, he sent her another message. Itzayis mutov. If you listen to me, all will be well. V'ilot savis, but if not, v'ilo savis zavdasa leidach mis. Prepare burial shrouds for another dead relative. So the Gemara says, and what ended up happening? Umisu kulhu. Ultimately, again, this woman did not heed the advice of Rav Huna, and Rahman al-Islan, she lost all of her children. L'sof Amrla, then he sent, again, after she endured all of this loss, he sent to her, Lo semush zabdasa lenafsheich, umisa. Ultimately, again, he said to her, she still was mourning excessively. He said, if you don't stop, you'll end up preparing burial shrouds for yourself. And ultimately, again, the end of the story is she ended up passing away as well. So the Gemara uses this as a story to support the idea that one cannot engage in excessive mourning. So I'll say, what's the pshat? What's wrong with excessive mourning? Al tifku l'meis v'al tanudu. Al tifku l'meis yoser midai. Do not cry for the dead excessively. V'al tanudu lo yoser mikashir. And do not literally, again, tanudu means to move your head. Also means a form of mourning. More than is appropriate. Haketz, that's supposed to say, what is the appropriate level of mourning? Shloshi yamim lebechi, 3 days for crying. Shiva lehespid, 7 days for eulogies. Shloshim legihutz v'letispores, 30 days for hair cutting, shaving, and laundering. Mikan ve'elech, but mourning any longer than this, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'atem rachmanim bo yoser mimeni. Hashem says to mourn more than that. Hashem says, you're not more compassionate than I am. So I will say, here's what's unfolding from this Gemara. What the Gemara essentially is telling us is as follows. The problem with excessive mourning is it looks like a rejection of divine judgment. At the end of the day, of course, we're sad when we experience loss. But sadness has to give way to acceptance. At least externally. The Gemara is not talking about say how the Avel feels internally, right? Internally, the Avels are going to feel broken and going to feel sad for a very long time. What the Gemara is discussing over here is how the Avel presents. And at a certain point in time, behaviorally, I have to transition into a framework of acceptance. This is what happened. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. The Ribono Shel Olam is the Dayan HaEmes. He is the truthful judge. And I have to learn to live with and accept his judgment. The concept of excessive mourning is the inability to go ahead and accept the divine judgment. And the Gemara says that's what's problematic. Now, how long? So again, the Gemara gives this example, 3 days for crying, 7 days. So Chazal trying to say is, again, we'll say people cry for much longer than 3 days. And the halacha is okay with people crying for more than 3 days. But the idea is that at a certain point in time, ultimately acceptance has to be the dominant feature. Also, I'll tell you, it's interesting. There's a fascinating halacha about this. So the Shulchan Aruch actually says, this is in Yeradei Hilchos Havelus, Simin Shin Tzadik Dalet Sif Aleph. Shulchan Aruch says, Ein miskashin ala meis yoser midai. Now the lashon over here is very interesting as well. You can't engage in excessive mourning. Right? Now both say, what's the ambiguity in this halacha? What's the ambiguity? What's excessive? So again, so much of this is based on the loss. Also people have different temperaments. Some people are very emotional, but I will say, but this is incredibly important. Excessive mourning, even excessive mourning during Shiva itself, is something that is not permitted in halacha. So again, Shulchan Aruch echoes this Gemara. Person who mourns excessively, ultimately, again, will come to mourn, unfortunately, for others as well. So actually, Shulchan Aruch says, Shloshi Yom Lebechi, Shiva Lahesped, Shoshel Metisbar Salegiyot. So both say, so this is the yesod. Excessive mourning is prohibited because excessive mourning, whether we mean it or not, essentially represents a rejection of the din of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And therefore, again, the Gemara says, I'm allowed to mourn, but not am I allowed to mourn, I'm encouraged to mourn. Right? But at the end of the day, the mourning has to have its limitations. I'll tell you something amazing. This is actually part of yesterday's daf, right? You may have noticed, right? So this is yesterday's daf. So we were supposed to do this on Tuesday. There was a fascinating article in Monday's Wall Street Journal. There's on Monday's Wall Street Journal, the title of the article was, Workers Get More Time to Grieve Losses. I don't know if anyone saw this. It was so literally, again, I came off the smichas chaver, so I looked at the paper and I saw this. There was this article, and so I want to read to you one part of it. It's actually amazing. So they're quoting this idea as it says about businesses now giving people time off to grieve. So they talk about this young woman, Jess Ma, her boyfriend died Nebuch by suicide. So what happens? So she went ahead and she canceled. It says she spoke about how she canceled the day of meetings, right? Then she can't because she figured out I just need a day or two. Then she canceled. It says she canceled a week of meetings, then another. In the end, she took 3 months off. So listen to this: she's an executive in a company and instituted an unlimited paid bereavement leave policy at the company. Unlimited paid bereavement, right? So both say, see, here's what's fascinating. Now, again, the beautiful part of the article is just trying to express the idea that you have these companies that are being sensitive to the fact. Now, again, it's interesting to see kind of what the world considers loss. Like, by the way, many companies, this covers also pet bereavement as well. I don't know that it's indefinite. But okay, leaving aside what the Welt determines as loss, but Lamaisa, it was fascinating to see unlimited paid bereavement. And you go ahead and you read this and you say, wow, that's really beautiful and compassionate. And then you see the daf and you say, no, that's actually really wrong. That's really wrong. The notion of unlimited bereavement is in and of itself theologically problematic from the Judaic perspective. There is no unlimited bereavement. In other words, there may be a part of me that's broken forever, and there may be a part of me that is sad, a certain part of me that's just forever. That may be true, but to be in a state of bereavement for a prolonged amount of time, that the Gemara says, not acceptable. But here's the difference. Difference between what the world has and what we have is that we have a fully immersive mourning experience. In other words, what we have, the notion of Shiva, is a concept of being fully immersed in loss. The world doesn't have that. It's a gift that Chazal or that Halacha gave us. That we have 7 days in which we do nothing else but mourn. I don't work, I don't go out, I don't travel, I don't have meetings. I literally just am enveloped in my loss for 7 days. Well, when a person has a fully immersive mourning experience and allows themselves to experience grief and allows themselves to experience the loss, I don't need paid indefinite bereavement. Because I've had the opportunity to mourn, now I have to accept that this is the Ratzon, this is the will of Hashem, and I have to figure out how to move on in life. Incredibly profound Gemara. So I'll say, let's go back there. So the Gemara says, Bacho, 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 Leholech. So the Pasuk says, cry, cry for the one who has left. Amrav Yehuda, Leholech below banim. This refers specifically again to one who passes away without having had children. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, Lo azah lebe avla, el leman da azah below bani. Rabbi Shua ben Levi would only pay a Shiva visit specifically to those who passed away without children. He felt that was truly the most acute loss, and that was where he felt that his presence could provide the greatest amount of consolation. Kilo yashuv od. V'raz eretz molad Torah. Funa amar zesh avar aveira v'shanaba. So both listen to this. When the pasuk says kilo yashuv od, pasuk says dichse bachal bachal leholech kilo yashuv od v'ra haaretz, because ultimately he will not return and see the land of his birth. So Rav Huna says not talking about death. What is it talking about? Zesh avar aveira v'shanaba. Both say this is talking about a person who committed an aveira and then repeated the aveira. That if a person does an aveira and repeats an aveira, lo ra'a v'ra'a es eretz moladato, he will not see his birthplace again. Which means that if a person commits an aveira twice, he'll never repent, he'll never do tshuva as a result. Well, say, now what does that mean? Once a person does an aveira and repeats it, hutralo, it becomes permitted to him. Hutralo, something like that becomes permitted. I will say a very profound Gemara that we've seen a number of times. When a person commits an aveira and repeats it, something amazing occurs, which is an act that was initially prohibited now suddenly becomes permitted, right? Human nature is, once we break down a barrier, unfortunately, even that which was once upon a time clearly prohibited now becomes permitted. I'm Rabbi Levi. Avol shloshim harishon years aswa kilu cherev munachas lo bein shtei ksefosa. Mesiras changes it. When an Abel, during the first 3 days of his Avela, should see like a sword is suspended between his shoulders. Mishlosha at Shiva, from between the third day until the end of Shiva, Kilu Munachasol Kinegi B'Karen Zavis, should see as if a sword of strict justice is in the corner opposite him. Mikan ve'ilach ki'ilu overes kinegdo b'shuk. Ultimately, again, afterwards, he should see as if the sword is opposite him in the marketplace. In other words, Rabbi say, when a person encounters loss, there's a certain midas hadin, right? A person has been dealt with the divine attribute of strict justice. That's what the sword represents. And it's a scary thing when justice hovers over you. So the Gemara is explaining over here that the Avel understands that the sword of divine justice is around. And in the beginning of loss, it's very close. And as loss goes on, again, it's a little bit further removed. But the Avel should understand that he is in a precarious, she and the family is in a precarious situation. Because once HaKadosh Baruch Hu has dealt with me, with Midas Hadin, the divine attribute of strict justice, it can mean, Chas V'Shalom, that midah, that attribute is still around, and I must conduct myself accordingly. So the Gemara goes right to the Mishnah said, we never go ahead and put the funeral bier of a woman out on the rechov, out on the street in public view. So the Gemara says, the Nardoi said, top of Chavchas, Lo shanu ela chaya. This is about a woman who died in childbirth. Because we'll say, what do we consider about a woman who died in childbirth? That she may still bleed. And it would be a lack of kavod. It would be a lack of kavod ames to her to have the tachrichim stained with blood. So therefore, again, if a woman dies in childbirth, then our Doim said we do not go ahead and put out her funeral bier in public. But other women, we put out their funeral bier. So Rabbi Eliezer says no. Afilu shar noshim d'chsiv v'tamas sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. Pasuk says Miriam died and she was buried there. So there's an immediate juxtaposition, samach lemisa kvura. So we learn from there that by a woman, we don't put their beer out, right, in public. Right? They don't put the funeral bier, the coffin, the funeral beer out in public. Al tznius for the woman. And that was true even by Miriam. Obviously, Miriam died as an older woman. She did not go ahead and die in childbirth. And therefore, Allah Lamaisa, we bury immediately. Amar Rabbi Lazar says, Af Miriam ben Ashika Mesa. Both says incredible. Miriam also died ben Ashika. Both say the Misa ben Ashika is the way Chazal described the what we'll call an easy death, a non-turbulent death. Aaron died ben Ashika. Literally means the kiss of Hashem. We're going to see the Gemara describes this as like the pulling of a piece of hair out of milk, right? The same way that hair comes out of milk. Again, there's no friction. There's no difficulty, right? It's not abrasive. So Misa ben Ashika also means this calm and serene type of death. So Miriam also died ben Ashika. Asya sham mi Moshe. We learn out from Gzir Shavuot Moshe Rabbeinu. Umipnei malo ne'emar ba pi Hashem. Shabbos say, interestingly enough, normally, when the Torah wants to describe Misa ben Ashika, right, a death that occurs by the kiss of God, the Lashon is a person died al pi Hashem, by the mouth of Hashem. So why doesn't it ultimately go ahead and say that by Miriam? Because apparently the Torah felt that it's not sanua for it to say al pi Hashem, by the mouth of Hashem, by a woman. By a woman. There was a certain lack of modesty in that. Therefore, the Torah doesn't say it as explicitly. Rabbi Ami, Lama nismacha misas min parshas Paradu. I will say it's incredible Gemara. Why is it that the death of Miriam is juxtaposed to Parshas Chukas, the parsha, the para aduma, the red heifer? Lomar lechama para aduma mechaperes af misasan shel tzadikim mechaperes. Teach us an incredibly important lesson. Just like the para aduma atones, right? Atones. So too again, the death of tzaddikim atones as well. The Gemara says, Rabbi Lazar lama nismucha misas Aaron lebigdeku. And I will say first wide line. Why is the death of Aaron juxtaposed to the section of the bigdei kahuna to teach us ma bigdei kahuna mechaprin, just as the clothing of kohanim, right? The wearing of most of the sixth parsha, the wearing of the bigdei kahuna allows the kohen to do the avoda, which provides atonement. Af misasan shel tzadikim mechaperes. So to the death of tzadikim atones as well. So we'll say it's interesting yesod. In general, what does it mean that the death of tzadikim atones? Right? Because truth is, in general, the concept of one person dying for the sins of the collective doesn't sound like an expressly Jewish concept. Hey, so what's the pshat? So Rav Kook, Rav Avram Yitzchak Kohen Kook, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha. says something so beautiful. He explains the concept of misas tzadikim mechaper means like this, that often when people are alive, we don't understand the full measure of their greatness. It's just the nature of life. Even if we know that a person is great, we don't really know how great they are. But when a person dies, often their true greatness comes out. Rav Kook says this is the pshat misas tzadikim mechaper. When a tzaddik dies and their true greatness comes out, and I say to myself, you know what? I want to be like that person. I want to emulate that person. I knew they were great. I knew they were great, but I never knew how truly great they were. Suddenly now that sparks a desire of emulation, and once that occurs, that emulation and that desire of the greater Am Yisrael to be greater as a result of the life of that person, that provides kapara. It's not the death of the tzaddik that provides the kapara. It's the death of the tzaddik that provides a window into their personalistic greatness, which then allows for emulation on the part of the rest of the klal. And it's that emulation and desire for greater personalistic goodness on the part of the klal that provides the atonement for klal Yisrael. So beautiful. TORAH banan. Meis pitom zoi misa chatufa. So we'll say the Gemara describes some very interesting things over here. If a person dies suddenly, that's called a misa chatufa, a snatched death. Now, it's not immediately clear what the ramification of these descriptions are, or in other words, we're calling it a particular type of death. What that means is not abundantly clear. Now we'll get to some more specificity in just a moment. If a person was sick for one day and then died, zohi misa dechufa. This is called a rushed death. This could also be death as a result of a plague. Shneimar ben Adam hineni lokeach mimcha es machmad enecha b'magefa. Uksiv va'adaber ela amba boker v'atamas ishti ba'erev. So we'll say there's a reference again to Yechezkel. Hashem tells Yechezkel, I'm going to take your wife in a plague. And ultimately Yechezkel says, I spoke to the people in the morning and my wife had passed away by the evening. Shnei yamim umeis. If a person was ill for 2 days and then died, zohi misa dechuya. This is called a hurried death. Gimel ga'ara. Arba'a nizifa. If a person dies after 3 days of illness, right? This is called ga'ara, right? Ga'ara could literally mean like a chiding, like a musar. Arba'a nizifa, rebuking. Shabbos, the Gemara here is very interesting. The Gemara here is describing that depending on how long a person was ill before they died, or if they died immediately, might also be an indicator about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu felt about that person. Chamisha, if a person is ill for 5 days before they die, zohi misas kol adam. That's called a regular death. Okay. Amar Rav Chana. So we'll say, so in general, what to do with these Gemaras, we'll see. Amar Rav Chana Mikra. So Rav Chana says, what's the pasuk that supports this? Hein karvu yamecha lamos. The pasuk says, behold, your days to die have come near. I'm sorry, lost the place. Hein karvu yamecha lamos. Good. So Gemara over quoting from the pasuk in Devarim, right, by Moshe Rabbeinu. Hein karvu yamecha lamos. So listen to what the Gemara darshans. Hein chad. Hein refers to one day. Karvu, trey. Yamecha, trey. Hari chamisha. Okay. So the Gemara says, Hein chad, shekem b'lashon yivani, koron la'achas, hein. And hein represents one, because in Greek, hein is one. Okay. So that's talking about over here, the description of the number of days a person is ill prior to death. Now the Gemara talks about when a person passes away. Meis b'chamishim shana, harei ze misas kares. If a person dies at the age of 50, that's indicative of kares. Now we're going to qualify a lot of these statements. Shin, as the Gemara says, chamishim ushtayim shana. If a person dies at 52, zohi misaso shel Shmuel haramasi. This is the death of the Navi Shmuel. Both says incredible idea. Even though the Navi says that Vayiki Zakin Shmuel became very old. In fact, the Gemara explains he looked very old, but he was in fact young. He passed away at the age of 52. Next, Shishim. If a person dies at 60, Zohi Misa Bidei Shamayim. That's death at the hands of heaven. Shabbos says, remember again, that's another form. So remember, we have Kares at 60, Kares at 50, Misa Bidei Shamayim at 60. Armar Zutra, Mikra, what's the pasuk that says, Tavo Bekelach Elai. So we'll say the pasuk the Gemara is quoting is from Eov. Tavo Bekelach Elai Kever Ba'alos Godish Be'ito. So the Gemara Darshans over here, Bakelach b'gematria shisin havu. Bakelach is 16 gematria. Shivim seva, to die at the age of 70, that's old age. Shmonim, to die at the age of 80, gevuros. That represents again the age of strength, right? Living to a ripe old age. Dichsiv yemei shnosa bam shivim shana ve'im b'gevuros shmonim shana. Amar Rabba. So we'll say, let's analyze this a little bit. So Rabba says, mechamishim va'ad shishim shana zoy misas kares. The truth is, if a person dies between 50 and 60, that decade window, that's kares. The Gemara says, v'haydel ochasha. So why didn't the Gemara say that before? The Gemara said 50 is kares. Why didn't the Gemara say that between 50 and 60 is kares? No, I will say because the Gemara was concerned that you might think Shmuel, who passed away at 52, died as a result of kares. But in fact, that wasn't the case. We'll say, so already, what do you begin to see? What you begin to see is something fascinating. So dying between 50 and 60 is kares, except when? When it's not, right? When it's not. So we'll say, so again, understand, what is a Gemara like this translated? I will say, you have to understand, a Gemara like this is so complicated, really. When a person, there are unfortunately many great people who die young, right? And today, especially today, dying between the age of 50 and 60 is young. So I will say, so every person that's 50 and 60, that's kares. No, what Chazal try to do when they sensitize us in these Gemaras is to understand there's meaning in everything, even in death. Even in death. Don't think for a moment that there's only meaning in life and not meaning in death. But even the same way, Rav Moshe has a tshuva. They don't do it today, but they used to go ahead and more readily induce labor. Right? They don't really do it today as much. Just today they'll do it for health purposes. But it used to be a woman wanted her doctor, right? Her doctor was going on vacation. So, induce me. I'm already in the window, induce me. So they asked Moshe the Shaila, are you permitted to induce labor for non-medical reasons? And Moshe paskind, no, why not? He says, because a child is supposed to come into this world at a particular time. And you're not supposed to mess with when a child comes into this world. Again, obviously, for medical reasons you have to, of course, that's not a Shaila. But Lamaisa, just arbitrarily, you can't do it. And what Chazal is sensitizing us to is, just like there's an ordained time that we come into this world, there's an ordained time that we leave this world. And just like there's meaning about the moment we come into this world, there's meaning about the moment when we leave this world as well. And how we leave this world, and when we leave this world, very often is reflective on how we've lived, what we've accomplished, and what we haven't accomplished. What that meaning is, sometimes is never really known in this world. But there's meaning. So Chazal say, never think for a moment that things are happenstance. And never think for a moment that things are just occur, are mikra, and a person dies young, and it's a tragic, it was an accident, there's no such thing as accidents, there's no such thing as mikra, the same way that when we come in is ordained, when we leave. Baruch atah b'voecha, Baruch atah b'tzeisecha, the b'voecha is ordained, the tzeisecha is ordained, and everything has meaning. That's the takeaway from this Gemara. What the meaning is, sometimes we never know. Sometimes we never know. But just know that there is absolute meaning. And to be clear, the meaning isn't always something bad, chas v'shalom. Right? The meaning also, because sometimes he's something beautiful and something holy and something incredible, no matter how painful the departure may be. But there's always meaning. The Gemara goes weiter. Rav Yosef Kela Bar Shisen, let's listen to this. When Rav Yosef turned 60, Avad Lahu Yamataval Rabbanan. He made a party. Right? He made a party. A yomtiv. Why? Amar Nafki Li Mikares. He said, I will say, this is I've escaped Kares party. Right? I've turned 60, Baruch Hashem. I've left the window of Kares, and therefore he celebrated. He celebrated that he left the window of Kares. Supposed to listen to this. Only Abai says, Nihi dinafikle mar Mikares Deshani, even though you've now no longer passed the years of Kares, Mikares Yomi minafki, have you gone ahead and left the days of Kares? In other words, that you've left the window of, we'll call it year Kares. In other words, 50 and 60. But Lamaisa, remember we saw before that if a person dies immediately without previous sickness, that could also be Kares. There's always one guy like this at the party, right? There's always someone like this. Nice party, but you're not really out of the woods yet, right? In other words, you could die immediately as a result of kares as well. Hopefully he brought a nice gift. You know, so the idea. So, but again, but I will say, but you do see something really amazing about it. I would say, who would ever think of this, right? Right? I'm making myself, I've escaped Kare's party. In other words, I will say, if you think about it, by the way, there's something actually really beautiful in it. That, you know, we live in such an incredible world with so many advances in medical technology. And you think about, again, how young people used to die and high rates of infant mortality. And what often happens in life is we kind of take things for granted. So we take for granted, right, living to 30, right, 40, 50, 60. We shouldn't. We shouldn't take anything for granted. Again, it doesn't mean you make a party for yourself every single day, but lamaisa, to sometimes appreciate the fact that the truth is there are no guarantees in life. There are no guarantees in life at all. And here you have Rav Yosef going in and saying, I'm so happy I made it to 60. So happy I made it to 60. To have an appreciation that really every incremental unit of life is such an incredible gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amrle, nokut lecha mia pal gabi adecha. So I'll say, the end of the story is Rav Yosef says to Abaye, you're right, but you got to celebrate what you've got. Another incredible musar. You're right, I got it. I have not escaped kares of days. Could it be that I'll die just immediately? Sure, that could always happen. But lamaisa, I'm happy I made it to 60. Which I will say also another incredible musar. There's some things you have to learn to celebrate the accomplishments in life, even if they're not absolute. Right? So again, was Rav Yosef out of the woods? No one's ever out of the woods. But lamaisa, let me celebrate the accomplishment at hand. So beautiful. Rav Huna, nachnaf shepitom. Rav Huna tells the story. Rav Huna passed away immediately. Now Rav Huna died without notice. So apparently he wasn't ill, he just died. So his students were very concerned. Because I will say again, what they were concerned about was, at the end of the day, does this mean that Rav Huna maybe did something wrong? Because the Gemara said before that dying immediately without, quote unquote, without notice, without illness, may be indicative of kares. So they got nervous about their Rebbe. So the Gemara says, so there was a group of Rabbanim who came from the city of Hadyab. Lo shanu ela shalagir legvuros. That's only true if a person didn't reach the age of gvuros. Rabbi say 80. However, but if a person reaches the age of 80, zohi misas neshika. This is called death by a kiss. Now, I will say very interesting. When do we say that immediate death, without any kind of warning beforehand, may be indicative of a problem when a person is young? But a person reaches the age of 80, right, Baruch Hashem, and they die without being sick, that's a bracha. That's a bracha. Again, sometimes difficult for the family because you don't get a chance to say goodbye. I will say, the backdrop to this is that, remember again, the Medrash tells us that until Yaakov Avinu, no one ever got sick. Right? People just died. Yaakov Avinu died, he davened for illness. He says, why did anyone ever daven for illness? Because he wanted people to know the end was coming. Because if I know the end is coming, I can get my affairs in order. So I will say, sickness before death sounds strange, sometimes is an incredible bracha. Because it allows people to say what they need to say, do what they need to do, and be properly prepared for the journey ahead. The exception to that may be when a person is old. That when a person is old, again, when I'm old, I should know the end is coming, and I should make sure not to leave anything unsaid or undone. So when I'm old, the ability to die without illness, that could actually be an incredible bracha. So the Gemara goes right to Amar Rava. Plus, say such incredible Gemaras. Amar Rava, Chaye bini umizone lo bischusa talya milsa ella b'mazal talya. So both say this is a wild Gemara. Rava says, Chaye, which means longevity, having children, parnasa, wealth, has nothing to do with merits and all dependent on mazel. Now I will say, a Gemara like this is a little bit wild. Because the scary part of the Gemara like this is, what does that mean? It's all dependent on my mazel? That means no matter what I do or I don't do, ultimately, again, these things are predetermined. And I will say, furthermore, again, there are so many, whenever we talk about mazel, well, it's interesting, by the way, the second day in a row we had mazel, right? Where do we have it yesterday? The dargush, right? The mazel bed. So it's interesting. Yet, I will say, remember, we have so many Gemaras that say, in mazel Yisrael. The concept of mazel, right? That you have a mazel, right? That you have a certain, almost like, predetermined fate, right? A mazel in a good way. Ultimately, again, there are many who reject that entire notion. Ein mazel Yisrael. So I'll explain to you what the Gemara is in just a moment. So watch this. The Gemara gives a story. To Rabba and Rav Chisda, watch this. Rabba and Rav Chisda, Tarvayu Rabbanan Tzadiki Havu, were both very righteous. We'll say, listen to this. Mar Matzli Va'asu Mitra, Umar Matzli Dasi Mitra. We'll say, what's, in general, like, how do you know if someone's righteous? Like, what's a good litmus test for righteousness? If they could daven for rain and it rains. By the way, that is true, absolutely, right? If you could daven for rain and it rains, you are up there. You are up there. So the Gemara says both of these Rabbanim, they were able to daven for rain and it rained. Okay. Rav Chisda, Chaya Tishin V'Tartin Shnin. Rav Chisda lived to 92. Rabba, Chaya Arban. Rabba lived until 40. Bei Rav Chisda, Shisin Hilule. In the house of Rav Chisda, Rav Chisda made 60 simchas. 60 simchas. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Bei Rabba, Shisin Tichlin. In the house of Rabba, they sat Shiva 60 times. 60 times. I will say 60 is probably hyperbolic on both ends. But what it means is, Rav Chisda's family, there was always a simcha going on. Rabba's family, unfortunately, always at Sarah. Bei Rav Chisda, Smida Lakalbi. Rav Chisda was so wealthy that they used to feed fine flour to the dogs. V'lo misbay, and they never had to ask anyone for anything because they always had plenty. Bei Rabba, in the house of Rabba, Namo the Sari, they subsisted on, right, barley flour, le'inshi, for the people. Right, barley flour is the most inferior flour. That's the people in the house had to eat v'lo mishtachach, and there was never enough of it. Shabbos said it's an incredible Gemara, because what is this a story of? It's a story of contrasts. Two great people of quote-unquote equal righteousness. However you define that, we'll call it equal righteousness. One has a beautifully blessed life. Children, grandchildren, simchas, parnasa, longevity. The other, loss, early death, tsaris, no parnasa. So the Gemara says, how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that? Two people, quote unquote, the same. They say, how do you reconcile it? So the Gemara wants to suggest, ultimately again, that it shows you that children, parnasa, longevity, is not dependent on personal zechuyos, but rather, again, is fundamentally dependent on mazel. So I will say, many of the commentaries of the Gemara say that no, what the Gemara is actually trying to, when the Gemara says it's dependent on mazel, that's another way of saying, we often don't know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs his world. And it's important to understand that you can do everything right and experience beautiful reap, benefit, reward. And you could do everything right and lead an incredibly difficult life. There's a concept of tzaddik v'ralo. Bad things happen to good people. Why is that? Shabbos say that is the question that is as old as time itself. And the inability to answer that question is at the core of what it means to have emunah. So I will say that's what emunah is. If we could actually answer that question, then there's no concept of emunah. The ability to believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu means I believe in Hashem despite the fact that I don't understand how the world works. I don't understand why people could do everything right and suffer so, and yet people could be like the most despicable human beings and yet seem to reap every single bracha. I don't understand how the world works. And that's ultimately what the takeaway message of this Gemara is. You could do everything right and get everything back from Hashem, and do everything right and yet have nothing go right for you in life. Why does that happen? I don't know, but I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs his world. And I have to somehow accept the fact that everything he does is emes and everything he does is tov. Incredible. Amarava, hanitzlas nili by kamishmaya. Listen to this. Rava said, I davened for three things. Two of them I got, one of them I didn't. What did I daven for? Right? I davened for the wisdom of Rav Huna. I davened for the wealth of Rav Chisda. The Yavuli, and I got both of those things. I got wisdom and I got wealth. Listen to this. And Visanuse Rav Rav Huna, I davened for the humility of Rav Rav Huna, lo Yavuli, and I didn't get it. They both say, by the way, very simple Gemara. You know why? You can't daven for humility, right? You work on humility. You could daven for wealth. You could even daven for wisdom. When it comes to humility, tikkun hamidos, becoming a better person. That's lo bashamayim here. Both say it's incredible yesod. Even wisdom, right? Both say knowledge, the ability to acquire knowledge is based on the way, right, your intellect works, your brain works. That's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we'll say, somebody has a photographic memory. That's not their accomplishment. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them that. Somebody could retain massive quantities of information. That's from the Ribbon Shalom. So you could daven for Chachma. But humility, midos, that's lo b'shemaimi. That you have to make for yourself. So isn't that what's incredible? Rava said, I got wealth from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I got wisdom from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's amazing. My tefillos for humility have gone unanswered. Yeah, because you have to do it yourself. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Rav Soren both say incredible Gemaras. No, isn't this incredible? Yeah. Absolutely overwhelming. So the Gemara says, Rav Sorim achod de Rava. So both say Rav Sorim was the brother of Rava. Hava Yosef Kamei de Rava. He was sitting in front of Rava. And I both say the context over here is Rava is dying. Rava is dying. So what happens? So Rav Sorim is sitting with Rava. Chazi de Hava Kamenamnim. He saw that Rava was dozing. Now both say Menamnim in this particular context means he is drifting off into death. So he sees that Rava is about to die. So the Gemara says, Amar le, lema leimar delolot tzaron. Rav Rabosai, one of his final words, says to his brother Rav Sorim, tell the Malach HaMaves not to cause me too much pain. So this is Rava who's dying. The Rava who's about to die says to Rav Sorim, can you please daven on my behalf and ask the Malach HaMaves not to cause me too much pain? Amar le, mar lav shoshvinehu. You're best friends with the Malach HaMaves, right? So Rav Sorim says to Rava, you're Rava. You're Rava. The truth is, Rava said there are stories of Rava conversing with the Malach HaMaves. So Rav Sorim says to Rava, why don't you tell the Malach HaMaves? Amar le, kevan de imsra mazla lo ashkach bei. Once my mazel has been given over to him, he no longer listens to me. Rava said, which is an incredibly profound idea. Ain't shilton b'yom hamaves, like Kohal Shlomo Melech says. There is no rulership on the day of death. So Rava says, I'm about to die. I am powerless in this world. So any rulership or any strength I had, I no longer possess. Daven on my behalf. So Amarle, lis chazili. So Rav Sorim says, fine, I'll daven, but I want to ask you something. Will you come back to me after death? Incredible. Will you come back to me? Will you appear to me after you die? So the Gemara says, Amarle, lis chazili mar. So Rava says, so Rava dies, and he appears to Rav Sorim in a dream. Ischazile. So Rava appeared to Rav Sorim in a dream. Amarle havile lemar tzara. Tell me, was death painful? Was death painful? To which Rava responds, Amarle. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry. Amarle. I'm sorry. I lost the place. Amarle lemar tzara. Amarle kirivda dukusilta. Rava responded, no, it wasn't very painful. It was like when they draw blood. Literally it means the blood letters lancet, right? The same way you get a little prick, right? When you go ahead and they draw blood, it was like that little prick. It was that little bit of pain, right? But it was not a painful experience. Incredible. Rava, Havi Yosef Kamei Rav Nachman. So we'll say another story. Rava, okay, interesting enough now, switching a little bit, right? Rava, when he was young, was sitting by Rav Nachman. Chazi to come and Rav Nachman was dying, and he saw that Rav Nachman was about to slip into death. Amar le, leima le mardol tzara. So Rav Nachman says to Rava, can you daven to the Malach HaMaves, or can you daven that the Malach HaMaves should not cause me pain? Amar le mar lav adam chashavu. So Rava says to Rav Nachman, Rebbe, you're such an important person, you don't need me to daven on your behalf. Amar le man chashiv, man sofin, man rakia. Essentially, he said, who is important in front of the Malach HaMaves on the day of death? On the day of death, it's the Malach HaMaves who's powerful, and the death who are powerless. Amarle. So again, so Rava says, I'll daven for you, but Amarle lischazi limar. Will you appear to me in a dream after you pass away? Ischazile. So sure enough, Rav Nachman passed away, and ultimately he then appears to Rava. Amarle havili lemar tzara. So Rava asked Rav Nachman, was death painful? Amarle kimishchal bein samichalva. No, death was not painful. It was like the removal of hair from a piece of from milk. In other words, it was a smooth transition. We'll say this is by the Gemara calls a misa beneshika, death through the kiss of Hashem. But listen to what Nachman says: "The Amrli Hakadosh Baruch Hu zil bahu alma kad havis lo ba'ina dinafish biusise." But if Hakadosh Baruch Hu would tell me to come back to the world again and experience death again, I wouldn't do it. Why? Because there is great fear of the Malach HaMaves. So it seems Rav Nachman was saying was death itself is not a painful experience. But there is an element of fear that a person experiences with the Malach HaMaves. Rav Nachman said, I would not want to experience that fear again. The Gemara goes right there. Rabbi Lazar, Havaka Achal Truma, we'll say some great Malach HaMaves stories. Incredible. So Rabbi Lazar, Havaka Achal Truma. Rabbi Lazar was eating truma. There was a kohen who was eating truma. Is Chazilei, the Malach HaMaves appeared to him, and obviously, we'll say when the Malach HaMaves shows up, he's not there to say hello, right? He's coming to claim your neshama. So Rabbi Lazar is eating truma. The Malach HaMaves appears. Amarlei truma kachilna v'lav kodesh ikri. How you can't take me now? I'm eating truma. Truma is called kadosh. Truma is called kodesh. It's called holy. When I eat truma, I'm holy. You can't take me in a state of holiness. So we'll say what happens? Chavel shaita. The Malach HaMaves. Okay. So at the end of the Malach HaMaves accepted the argument. He left. The Rabbi say, here's what's interesting. Apparently, the Malach HaMaves cannot claim a neshama just at any time. There are particular times. And once the moment passes, the moment passes. So ultimately, he was unable to claim Rabbi Lazar's neshama. Rav Sheshes is chazili b'shuka. The Malach HaMaves appeared to Rav Sheshes in the shuk, in the marketplace. Amarle b'shuka ki behema. Right? You're going to take my life in the shuk like an animal? Isa gabebes. At least come to my house. Come to my house. So apparently the Malach HaMaves. So again, the story doesn't end, but it sounds like the Malach HaMaves acquiesced and took Rav Sheshes in his home. Rav Ashi is chazilei b'shuka. So ultimately, again, Rav Ashi saw the Malach HaMaves in the shuk. Amalei said to the Malach HaMaves, Israch li tlasin yomin v'ahadju leTalmudai. Do me a favor, come back in 30 days. Come back in 30 days. Go ahead and let me review, give me 30 days to review all of my learning. Right? And then I will yield my soul to you. The Amiso, because everyone says, well, listen to how beautiful this Gemara is. Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmuda biyado. Praiseworthy is the person who comes to Olam Haba and his learning is in his hand. I will say here, the good plug for Chazara. But the idea being, at the end there, I will say, what do you come armed with? After 120, what do you come with? What do you come before the Beis Din Shalmala armed with? Your learning. Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmudo biyado. But say your Talmud Bavli, right? When you come with your Daf, when you come with your Gemara, right? When you come with your Torah, that's what you come armed with before the Beis Din Shalmala. I will say it's incredible. It doesn't say Ashrei Misha Balakan u'mitzvosav biyado, which is quite amazing. Ashrei Misha Balakan v'Talmudo. Your Talmud Bavli, your Daf Yomi, your Torah, that's what you come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu with. Incredible. So the Gemara says, B'yom Tlas and Asa, 30th day, Malach HaMaves shows up. Amalei my kuli hai, right? What? So this is interesting. So Rav Ashi says, Malach HaMaves, what's the rush? What's the rush? Like, why? I got it. He's here, like 30th day, come day 31 day 32. What's the rush? What's a very profound Gemara? So the Malach HaMaves, I'll tell you why. Kadoch karaglei de barnasan. So the Malach HaMaves said to Rav Ashi, because it's time for Barnasan to become the Rosh Yeshiva, to become the Nasi, right? It's time for Barnas to become the Nasi. And ultimately, as long as you're alive, he can't become the Nasi. So you have to die for him to become the Nasi. Which is an incredibly profound yesod. You know, often we kind of look at our lives, ultimately, again, through a vacuum. Through a vacuum. Okay, through a vacuum. So I would say, meaning what? That we look at our lives, through the importance of our lives, what we don't realize is that we're a cog in the wheel. We're a cog in the wheel. And that sometimes, ultimately, again, we have to leave the stage so that someone else could enter. It's a difficult lesson to accept, but an important one nevertheless. Rav Ashi, you're wonderful. But at the end of the day, you have to go ahead and leave so that there is room for someone else to come on board. Rav Chisda lo havi yochele. The law of a shasik purim begirsa. So Rav Chisda, the Malach HaMaves cannot take his soul because he would not stop learning. Salik Yasef ba'arza. So the Malach HaMaves went, he sat on a cedar tree. Right? The Beirav. Paka arza v'shasik. The cedar tree split, and ultimately, again, as a result of that, Rav Chisda stopped learning just for a moment. And when he stopped learning, we'll say the power of learning. When he stopped learning, that's the Malach HaMaves was able to take his soul. Rav Chia lo havi matzi lemikraveh. The Malach HaMaves was unable to get close to Rav Chia. Yom achad idmi le ka'anya. One day the Malach HaMaves appeared like a poor person. Also, Taraf Abava. He went and he knocked on the door. Amrli apikli rifta. So the Malach HaMavis asked Reb Chia for bread. Afikule, and he gave him bread. Amrli v'laf kamarachim mara anyahu gavra amayla kamarachim. You have so much rachmanas on the poor person. Why don't you have rachmanas on me, the Malach HaMavis? To which the Gemara says, Galilei achvile shuta denara. The Malach HaMavis revealed himself, showed him literally again. Shuta denura means, I will say, like a bolt of fire. Apparently, that's the Malach HaMavis carries around. Amtzile nafshe, and Reb Chia willingly gave over. So we'll say, all right, we'll stop over here. Miras Hashem for today. Miras Hashem tomorrow. Last daf of Maseches Moed Katan. We'll begin at the Mishnah. Shkoyach. It's in Shulamis. Yeah, why here? I don't know.